be difficult, but I'm going to show you something a little different. We're talking about evil today, which has got nothing to do with what I said about showing up on time, although I guess that's a very small, very small evil in the great scheme of things, and even by my lights. I was talking about evil last night as the privation of the good, and throughout the course we've been talking about human nature as well, about the way in which modern science conceives of human nature as a consequence of Descartes' thought experiment, which he predicates on the idea of doubting everything. And I said to you that not only does that never lead to certainty in the realm of science, it at best leads to probability. So you'll note that the appeal to statistics never actually comes to prove anything with certainty, because it can't. It simply shows that there's a high probability of doing things. And so the idea of probability in the maths and sciences is very interesting. It's called finite math. I did it at first year university myself. And has an effect on truth, actually, and the belief in truth as the reality that reasoning minds can access. It is fundamentally, in some ways, at odds with ever getting to the point of certitude. So it's not only that you can't prove the existence of God, whom you can't see, you can't even be really much certain about anything. It can be highly probable, but you can't really claim it as knowledge per se. So even the word science, which is the Latin word for knowledge, scientia, is thereafter not ever truth, but more probability. So we appeal to the facts rather than reasoning and argumentation. And that has an effect on human nature. As I've said, it's not only that we will dispute what the church fathers would have understood as pretty much beyond contestation, that a human being is a person, and a person is an individual substance of a rational nature, says Boethius. It's going to then represent reasoning in a certain way, which is at odds with the universal way in which it had been understood from the university inception onwards. Remember, the university is a medieval institution. It's going to take it in the direction of high probability at best, which it will call science, and then that will be open to change, because new scientific discoveries, facts will be discovered that will disprove the previous theories, and what was called truth actually gets overturned. So in a sense, science never deals with truth anymore. It deals with its best guess at truth. It approximates the truth, but it only ever can do that because the methodology doesn't allow it, and its view of reasoning doesn't allow it, which is Descartes' view of reasoning. I say that because in the background here, I have a picture of an operating theatre in England of a woman by the name of Dagmar Turner. You'll never have heard of her. I hadn't heard of her until I heard about her on the news. This is from 3 years ago. She had a brain cancer, and she was a violinist. She's not a professional violinist, but she loved the music. And her surgeon also was a lover of music. And he's doing a brain surgery on her. And what you will find here is, in order to do the surgery, she wants her musical abilities to be preserved. Normally they put you out entirely when they do the surgery like this. She wanted to be able to, for violin you need intensely sensitive motor neuron coordination between your mind, your brain, and your hands, the dexterity, both hands. Like one hand's doing the bow movement, and the other is moving this, and it's very fine motor coordination. And so she played during it to help him do the surgery, yet allow her to maintain the musical gift, because she thought, and he thought, that the music was essential to her person. I say that because one of the 7 liberal arts is music. And it's connected with the quadrivium. It's one of the sciences connected with arithmetic and geometry and astronomy and music. And we've already seen with Lewis how he reflects that in Out of the Silent Planet and the idea of the music of the spheres and how that connects with beauty and truth and goodness. All of these things are connected in his cosmos. Likewise in Tolkien's. Last time I said, in response to the question, our perception that evil is not only a real thing, but more real than the good, or more real than health. I think the way in which we conceive the humanities, or the human, is an important part of the discussion, and it gets brought out in a sense by the video. I'm just going to play it. It's a minute clip. I hope it's not too loud. So the purpose of this is to say that her human nature is connected with her love of music. For her, it means a lot. Oh my goodness, go away. Oh, stop. Does it automatically. For her, she did not want to lose her sense of musical ability. It was something she intensely valued. It wouldn't have been at the cost of her life. She was a mother as well and had children, didn't want. But if it were possible, she wanted this to be preserved because she saw it as so important. And her surgeon, who placed his reputation on the line by operating with a woman who was actually conscious, and if something bad had happened, he also would have been at reputational risk in the process. Who knows about liability? Agreed with her. That brain that he operated on is not her mind. But the organ that the brain is, and it doesn't have any, by the way, there's no neurons, so she wouldn't feel pain from the surgical apparatus. There's no actual, as I say, there are no nerves in your brain. Looks a little gory in some ways, and obviously it is. But he was able, because she was awake, to recognize where she was off key by touching certain things. And again, being on key, and the exact note and the exact sensitivity and pressure is part of being able to play music. And recognizing that mathematically, because it is a mathematically precise observation that articulates itself in a sound. She saw beauty in the goodness or the truth of the exact representations there. Very interesting there, but it's connected to the fact she has a brain. And Descartes doesn't conceive of us having brains. He says that we have minds. He doesn't see it as a physical thing. He says the body is an extension of the res cogitans, the thinking thing. The thinking thing is not the brain. It's the mind, because the mind is able to conceive of itself, outside of itself. From the outside, it can think in abstraction. Just think of mathematics. There is no physical thing that we call a number. It's an abstract concept, and yet essential to reasoning. And we can use numbers to understand things through that. What this shows us, and I think what Tolkien is trying, and Lewis are both trying to do against the scientific materialists, the reductionists of their day, is to articulate a view of human nature in which the mind and the body are unified while being distinguished. And they're not going to be scared by the idea that brains are a part of it. It's just they're not going to reduce the mind to the brain. That's a form of materialism and irrationalism, really, because then it would just say that thinking is a biochemical process, and when we think we're thinking, it's just epiphenomenology. It's just an appearance that we're thinking, but we're not really thinking. We just feel like we're thinking because the brain chemistry makes us feel certain things. If that were true, we could not communicate and be rational and be wrong and it could be demonstrated that we were wrong through logic. There wouldn't be such thing as logical fallacies. The laws of logic would not hold, but they do hold. How would this even be possible? Well, one of the ways, and this is really interesting, I was thinking about this afterwards because I was asked afterwards about this. It's off topic slightly, but it's also totally relevant. When Augustine tries to articulate the Trinity in his work on the Trinity, I'm not going to put it up here for lack of time. Here, get rid of this lady. Sorry. And this. And this. All gone. He talks about the way in which the word works. Remember last time I said that the word was central to Tolkien's production of language and myth and ideas that started with the word? He is trying to replicate what he sees in Scripture there. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, the Word was God. Okay, so that's a reference to Jesus, right? Everyone recognizes that. Second person of the Trinity. However, how does the divine Word made flesh relate to the other persons of the Godhead? Augustine gives an analogy, and it's a really interesting one. You can think without speaking. You have a thought in your head, and you're not saying it out loud, but you clearly can think in words without speaking in words, right? So it's a word that's in your mind. As soon as you articulate it, it takes on a different form, in a sense. It goes through your mouth, it makes a noise. And that noise, which is articulate in the sense it points at something that's very specific, has a definition, will go into somebody's ears and then be a part of their mind as well. How is it that a word that's in my mind, then in my mouth, and then in your ear are unified? It's again a Trinitarian type thing. Now he's not saying this is a way of understanding the Trinity, but it explains how one thing can be unified and at the same time seen in three different, I don't want to get into some sort of heretical presentation, but Augustine talks about that in the Trinity, and I do think it explains Tolkien's view of language and why language is so important. It begins, so because the question was, which is prior, the thought or the articulation of the thought, the words? From childhood, we might say, I don't even know what we would say. Do children have thoughts before they can speak? I don't know, because they learn languages, right? They're not born speaking. We don't know if they're thinking or not. Exactly. They clearly have the capacity for thinking, even if it's not fully developed. It's still there, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to learn the language to begin with. But they don't come out of the womb speaking. Not even Jesus did that. He would have learned languages. But then he develops that capacity. The downbeat of Scripture is that the Word comes first. And that's how people know who God is, through the preaching of the Word as well. That's how they know. It is spoken. It's not unspoken. They don't know by looking at the book of nature. It needs to be heard, proclaimed. And hence the priority of Scripture in the economy of knowing, I would have thought. At any rate, it was just a thought I had afterwards, but it does connect to the course themes here in important ways, I think. And you can tease that out in all manner of different directions. But as it says in Colossians 1 verse 15, in him all things hold together. That I can put up. Put it up in my previous class. I'll put it up. Go away. Go away. Hate it. It's the image of the invisible God. Oh, I want the whole thing. There we go. Oh my goodness. You can, oh. Want to die. Absolutely want to die. There you go. Sell me something. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth. Reference to the word, clearly, right? John 1 echoed here. John 1 verse 1. On earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So it talks about the uncreated being of Christ being before all things that were created. And he's the head of the body of the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Okay, there's a lot there, and this isn't a sermon. But you can see the importance of the word and the image of God there expressed in this. And the image is what Adam and Eve both have. And this has to do with the view of human nature. Now, Lewis, when he was talking about this image of God, reflecting probably on Boethius' definition, called creatures even outside of humanity hnau, which meant that they were individual substances of a rational nature. But they were not human, having said that. Right? So they were other individual substances of a rational nature, hypothetical, I mean, it is science fiction after all, who looked differently. But after, and this is declared as the novels progress, after God became flesh, every creature thereafter would only be human. There would be no more of those old types of creatures. So is the speculation, because after all, after God becomes flesh, rational nature takes on that individual substance, that you're not going to get better than that. We're done with that. That's Lewis. Tolkien, on the other hand, I'll say more about this as we progress, comes up with a very similar, I was reading some of your essays and fascinated by the thoughts that come up that I don't speak to on class, but occur to you. This has occurred to me, but I didn't mention it in class. I need to say it. In the sci-fi trilogy, he talks about the three beings, the Hrasa, the Saroni, and the Fifiltrigi. And the Hrasa correspond to the poets, and the Saroni to the scientists, and the Fifiltrigi to the practical individual. So in Out of the Silent Planet, Ransom is the poet or the philologist. Weston is the Saroni, the scientist. Divine is the Fifiltrigi. What you see in the three men is a distortion of what you see rightly in the three extraterrestrials. Right? And so you get a sense of being taught how you ought to be in this area. And they all collaborate and they're all in unity even while pursuing different crafts. So the Saroni, the scientists, are really good at the quadrivium. They understand mathematics, they understand astronomy, they understand music. Music is not one of the arts, it's one of the sciences. And they understand geometry. They know all sorts of things. But they don't do good poetry, they're not very good at it all. And that is what the Hrasa do. So there is a sort of a specialization, but there's a compatibility. There's no war going on. There's no war for supremacy. That is introduced by a different impulse than that of knowledge. It's that of power and domination, which is what the Lord of the Rings is about. What are the correspondences in the Lord of the Rings? Well, it's not for this class because we're going to talk about it not in the class on evil, but it seems to me the hobbits correspond to the Hrasa. They love stories. They love old stories. They like recounting them, like hearing them. They love singing. They rejoice in that. The elves seem to me a lot like the Saroni. They love the stars. They understand things in a profound, abstract way. There's a sort of wisdom associated with the elves. And the dwarves seem like the Fifiltrigi. They're craftsmen. They craft things out of gold. And they delight not in the gold, but in the craft of it. So they are, again, all three of them seem to be very corresponding with Lewis's own work. And the men who are alongside them are none of those three. They're more like Ransom, watching a version of this, and yet it's not their age. The age of men is coming. It's not the age of men when we follow the Lord of the Rings. Not yet. They're there. They're important, but they haven't yet got to the point where the other creatures are off the stage, where mankind will be front stage, full center. It's all about humankind. It's still the other creatures. So I do think that the two men are doing the same thing in different ways. I don't know if it occurred to you or not, but it struck me afresh how similar the two were in this. This is just my hypothesis, but I think it's correct. And that doesn't mean that the men don't have any of those things, but that in a sense they're best represented. Men cannot replicate the knowledge that the elves have, or that to some degree that the hobbits have, or the ability with craftsmanship of the dwarves. When they die, it dies with them. And it may be their job to recover that. But there is another problem with human nature. Well, that's not even on the canvas right here. Again, that comes with the fall and with the death and resurrection of Christ. We're not there yet. And so I do think Lewis and Tolkien have a commonality there. But I'm going to talk about evil. So let me stop.